Today, I'm talking with Ivory-billed woodpecker researcher Matt Courtman. Matt has been involved with the Ivory-billed woodpecker for over 40 years and is director of the Louisiana Wilds and Mission Ivorybill, two organizations with goals dedicated to proving the Ivory-billed woodpecker still exists and needs protection. Matt has recordings of what he believes to be ivory-billed woodpeckers from 2017 and also reported having sightings of the birds on 2 occasions in 2019. Although it seems nothing short of clear video or photo evidence will change the opinions of most people, myself included, Matt's evidence is intriguing. We recorded this talk before the extinction declaration for the ivory-billed woodpecker was proposed in September of 2021. We talked for over 3 hours about the bird and Matt's work, and I've edited the interview down for brevity. Please enjoy this talk with Matt about one of the nation's most intriguing and controversial species, and decide for yourself. Does the ivory-billed woodpecker still exist? Hey everybody, we're here with Matt Courtman today. And so the story of how I met Matt is actually, I'm a grad student at Nicholls State in Louisiana, and I was posting about wanting to see some cool birds in the state on Facebook. And Matt commented and asked if I would be interested in doing some ivory-billed woodpecker searches. And to me, like coming down the ivory-billed woodpecker was kind of like a Sasquatch, you know, like everyone was just kind of like, if you ever mention it, like, oh, you're crazy. Those things don't exist anymore. So I was like, wait, ivory-billed woodpecker in Louisiana? Like there's people that, you know, actually do this. And I'm like, of course I'd want to do that. So we've been talking about going out and doing some searches, and I've learned more about what Matt's doing. So I wanted to bring him on and talk to you guys about his work with the ivory-billed. So thanks so much for joining us, Matt. If you want to just give a little introduction about how you got into this and all that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Derek. George Lowry at LSU, and that's Lowery, famous for many reasons, but he essentially founded the LSU Museum of Natural Science and was a great ornithologist, but as typical of many of his day, and perhaps still, his PhD was actually from Kansas in mammalogy, but he's from my hometown of Monroe, Louisiana. At any rate, so I read in Louisiana Birds the definitive book of Louisiana birds, and Dr. Lowry's account about the ivory-bill. And so I drew pictures of ivory-bills when I was 8 and sent it to Dr. Lowry with Dear Dr. Lowry, do you think the ivory-bill still exists? And he wrote back to what to me was a cryptic answer. He said, it sure seems like there's a lot of territory that hasn't been searched. Next time you're in Baton Rouge, why don't you come to the museum and I'll show you some specimens. So he was just an incredibly generous person. So very shortly thereafter, my father and I went down from Monroe's in Northeast Louisiana down to Baton Rouge to LSU to see a LSU domination of Mississippi State in football. And so Dr. Lowry waded through post-LSU game night traffic in Baton Rouge to open to an unknown to him prior to that 8-year-old boy and his father, my father and me, the LSU Museum, and he let me hold ivory-bill specimens. So
that's cool.
Yeah, not surprisingly, that really hooked me.
Yeah.
And so that was over 50 years ago. George Lowry, my ivory-bill mentor, he's in 1934, as a 20-year-old, he presented at the American Ornithologists Union in Chicago a paper which discussed I don't like the term, but I'll use it, rediscovery of the ivory-billed woodpecker in Northeast Louisiana. And the reason I don't like the term is everybody who hunted in those woods knew that ivory-bills had never gone extinct. So at any rate, Dr. Lowry had gone over, again, he was 20 years old. He reported on the presence of the ivory-billed woodpeckers in what was then the Singer Tract, now Tensas River National Wildlife Refuge, just southwest of Tallulah, Louisiana, close to the Mississippi River, just west of Vicksburg, Mississippi. At any rate, Dr. Lowry reported that at the AOU meeting in Chicago in October of 1934, and it so happened that the pros from Cornell were there, and they were very excited because they'd been given state-of-the-art movie recording, both audio. I've decided to move back. I don't want to frighten your listeners.
They'll be fine.
Cornell had these great both film and audio resources. So they set out to record the birds of America. And having heard from 20-year-old George Lowry about the Ivorybills in Louisiana, they of course wanted to get the Ivorybills. So the birds had been serially declared extinct starting around the 1900s, but in 1924 they'd been thought to be extinct. And Arthur Allen, who's later going to be a hero in our story, Arthur Allen and his wife in 1924 were led to a pair in Florida. So the bird was rediscovered, but those birds, that pair that Dr. Allen and his wife had been led to, they were shortly thereafter harvested. So then okay, well, that was it. That was the last Ivorybill. So science thought. And again, this is a much longer conversation, and this is interesting. This is why I've come back home, because again, the country people knew that the Ivorybills still existed, I'm sure in Florida and Louisiana and other places. But back to your question, what's the status of the Ivorybill? So in 32,
I want to mention, so the Cornell team went and they actually did document the Ivorybills at the Singer Tract, correct?
Correct. In April of 1935.
Yeah, and the pictures of that look funny because they're out there with this big like camera and tape machine and like in the middle of this forest.
I tell you, Jim Tanner was a student at Cornell then. Just to give you the lineup, it was Arthur Allen who essentially birthed modern field ornithology when he founded the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in 1914. So it was, Arthur Allen and Paul Kellogg and George Sutton were the professors, and then along for the ride was Jim Tanner as the student who did all the field work. And as a searcher, I almost resent Jim Tanner's fantastic field work in the sense that, so we have the photos you've referenced from 35 that the Cornell expedition took. It looks as if, oh, well, that would be easy. Well, Jim Tanner scaled the cavity that the shots are taken from was 43 feet up in the air. And so he had, done the work to get a blind up there and, lots of work. So at any rate, those beautiful photos all come from April of 1935 when Cornell was there. And subsequently, Jim Tanner, then a student, he was awarded, he was at the Audubon Society, I think in late 36, early 37, funded his census of ivory-billed woodpeckers in the southeastern United States. So that was his dissertation at Cornell, which later became, I usually have the book around, in 1942, he published the Ivory-billed Woodpecker, which was basically a monograph based on his thesis. And that's where most of what we think we know came from Jim Tanner's work. But anyhow, just to give you the quick chronology. So 24 thought to be extinct, then rediscovered in Louisiana in 1932, in the sense that a state legislator, Mason Spencer, had overheard in the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries building in New Orleans, had overheard two biologists saying that the ivory-billed woodpecker was extinct, which was surprising to legislator, he was a member of the House of Representatives. Mason Spencer said, are y'all talking about Kents? Kents, is what country people called ivory-bills because that's the sound they make. So he said, there still exist where I hunt in Madison Parish. Of course, Louisiana has parishes and not counties, and the Department of Wildlife people gave him a permit to collect an ivory-bill, and I think actually two. At any rate, he shortly thereafter produced a male ivory-billed woodpecker, which is what alerted
that he shot, correct?
That he shot. Well, it's funny you should mention that. That we assume he shot. There are those. This is one of those things. It's so much fun being home because I've heard the rumors that actually Mason Spencer didn't shoot the bird; somebody else did. As if that was a great slur, right? He wasn't a good enough hunter, and I don't know anything about that. But we'll put it this way: Mason Spencer quickly produced an ivory-bill a dead ivory-bill.
Right.
So the ivory-bills are rediscovered, and then in 44. With the destruction of the habitat, the Singer Tract was the last large tract of virgin bottomland forest in the United States, which was not clear cut, but was largely felled to the war effort, such that in 1944, Don Eccleberry was commissioned by the Audubon Society to go to northeast the Singer Tract, and he painted and actually sketched. I think it was mostly pen, but at any rate, the last Ivorybill, and that's the last widely accepted, was 1944. So it was thought that the birds were extinct, and then because they couldn't survive and they wouldn't adapt to new settings. So there are scattered reports after then, and we know that Jim Tanner said, he made annotations where he accepted them, and there's some in Central Florida in the 50s and et cetera, et cetera. But by and large, I would say almost a consensus among professional ornithologists, the birds were extinct, by the 60s. But in 1971, this is important. My mentor and hero in many ways, George Lowry, at the AOU meeting, and there's a symmetry in that. So 34, he basically announced to the birding world that the Ivorybills had been found again. Then in 1971, I think it was in Seattle, at any rate, Dr. Lowry published presented two photos, which were later published, of clearly an male Ivory-billed woodpecker in a tree. So the two images from 1971 were clearly a male Ivory-billed woodpecker in two different trees. From the people who thought that Dr. Lowry had been the victim of a hoax, again, no one accused Dr. Lowry of perpetrating a hoax. They thought that somebody was pulling his leg. Was the fact that in both photos, you couldn't see the eyes of the bird, and that's, of course, very important. If it's a skin, you can't really replicate the eye, and you couldn't see the feet, and you couldn't see the bill. And so I would say maybe not a consensus, but the overwhelming majority of professionals thought that those 1971 photos from South Louisiana were not of our living Ivory-billed woodpeckers. They thought they were maybe hunting camp specimens that somebody had put up there. And it's worth a 3-minute diversion to tell you what I found out about that. So at the time Dr. Lowry published those photos, he was deeply wounded that the birding world didn't respond in the way that they had in 1934, that they would question him. And he thought, oh my, this will be, hooray, we found the Ivorybill. Well, it was really the opposite. It was more, it's really sad that Dr. Lowry has been the victim of a hoax. All right. And so many years later, in this century, it was discovered that the guy who'd taken the photographs was Fielding Lewis, who in Franklin, Louisiana, was a longtime publisher of the Franklin Banner Tribune and was boxing commissioner of Louisiana. And the most tantalizing thing, and this will be the first that this gets published, is whether or not there were photographs of Ivorybills flying. So I've heard the story that a graduate student of Lowry's who subsequently interviewed Fielding Lewis, and Fielding Lewis passed away a while ago, so I never got to talk to him, though I've talked to his daughter.
Interesting.
This graduate student from LSU said that Fielding Lewis said that he had photographs of flying birds, but flying Ivorybills, but the images weren't very good, and Fielding Lewis didn't want to publish it. And honestly, Derek, I don't want to get too far afield. This could be a book. So as we sit here today in 2021, if you put a gun to my head, I would say that those 1971 photos were of living Ivorybills.
Since then, there was the Arkansas rediscovery, right? That
right.
The video that came out, and then and do you think that one was legit or not?
Yeah. So just briefly for the audience members who are not familiar, the short answer is yes, it was legit. I think they saw at least a lone male Ivory-billed woodpecker in Arkansas in 2004 and 5, and I think 6 and 7 also. But so the legit question, Derek, was the Luneau video, and Luneau is Luneau. So there's a video that John Fitzpatrick is the director of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Director Fitzpatrick had to decide whether or not to publish this video, which Cornell said was an Ivory-billed woodpecker, and they got a lot of pushback. back and forth. David Sibley and a few others, very prominent people, said no, it's not an Ivorybill, it's a pileated. Personally, I think it's an Ivorybill from the flight diagnostics, but in terms of where's the white and all that, I'm not an expert on video, and I don't know what the lighting would matter. My impression is it flew like an imperial would. So this, just again for your audience might know, that Ivory-billed woodpecker superficially looks like a pileated woodpecker. Our two large American woodpeckers, both larger than about crow size, the Ivory-bill slightly larger at 21 inches, the pileated typically 19 inches, but there's variety. But anyhow, back to the question of what was the thing in the Cornell video. And that, to me, that's almost a red herring. There are several reports of sightings by trained ornithologists. I think there's 7 that Cornell published, maybe 8. But having seen the birds in the wild, there's very little doubt. I think if anybody's seen an observant person watched a pileated a dozen times, the thing that's flying by is not a pileated. And honestly, I think a much more likely mistake would be a black-bellied whistling duck, just because of the white in it. And
that's a good observation. Like, I never thought about that, because the Ivory-bills, they fly more like ducks, right?
Right. And again, I don't want to overstate. This is one of these things where, I wish I had a little sign like, Coyote did, like you could say, always take this with a grain of salt. So the Ivory-bill, for your audience, the Ivory-bill, its vocalizations and the way it drums are different than other American woodpeckers. So as your audience will know, that woodpeckers drum. So American woodpeckers, it can be a or maybe slightly, but the Ivory-bill does a double knock like that. So in hopes of forcing some behavior and based on some research, in March of 2017, the first time I did a double knock, when you with some 2x4s, I got a response. So my friend Frank Wiley, Wiley, had passed away in January of 2017, and my wife Lauren and I were living in Ohio. And so when Frank, he had an area in Louisiana. I don't even know that. He had an area in Louisiana, which we'll just say was not the Chaffalot, and it had not really been searched much. And Frank Wiley and then Mark Michaels, who's a New York lawyer, a recovering lawyer like me, and Mark has an incredible mastery of the literature of the Ivory-bill. So Frank and Mark had Project Coyote. So I hadn't met Mark. Frank had taken me to this area, and I'd known Frank. But anyway, so Frank had passed away. So as a tribute to Frank, I was going to go down to his search area, and I emailed Mark. And Mark said, "Oh, yeah, I'll meet you there." So it was Mark and I and a guy named Phil Van Bergen, who was a great student at University of Louisiana Lafayette. So the three of us were in the field, and Phil and Mark were deploying camera traps along a creek. And I went into the woods and was going to do a double knock. And I walked away from them, and I did the double knock with my very inartfully. I'm just banging 2x4s together, because honestly, at that point, I hadn't really done the research of what another Campephalus sounded like, because we have the accepted 1935 recordings that Cornell made. Those were accepted as being the sounds, the calls that the Ivory-bills make, that can't, and there are other calls that they do, but we don't have any accepted double knocks, right? The bam, bam, and it's really uniform. So I just started banging wood, and I immediately heard what sounded like a response to it, but because I was so skeptical, I thought they were playing it, because I didn't know Mark and Phil. I thought they were playing, and they knew each other. I thought they were playing a trick on the new guy. I thought it was like a snipe hunt, right? So I get this fevered text from Mark in which he says, "Oh my God, did you hear that?" And I said, "Ha ha, very funny." Texted back and said, "I heard you play back a Magellanic woodpecker or some other Campephalus." And Mark said, "No, promise we didn't." And I said, "Okay, humor me, play back from your current position, anything." And he did. And that's when the hair on my arm went up, because Mark and Phil were approximately at my 4 o'clock, and the sound had come from my 12 o'clock. So then I realized they hadn't made the sound, and it certainly sounded like you figured an Ivorybill would sound like. And then later, so that was in the morning. Later in that afternoon, nearby in the same forest, we heard Kent's. And then I think Phil got a couple. It was a series of about 8. I think Phil got a couple, like the last 2. And then I had the idea that we need to get in here first thing in the morning. And although now I'm quite skilled at navigating, in particular in those woods in the dark, I wasn't then. I didn't have there's great nav apps, and I do a good job of putting tacks up in the swamp forest, so you don't fall into the bad. Right. So Phil came back a couple days later, and we were able to get back to that same spot before first light, and then he and I independently recorded approximately 3 hours of Ivorybills.
But you guys didn't see anything that whole time?
We didn't see anything, but the sounds were coming. It always sounded to me like there were 3 different sources for the sounds, and they were across the creek. And this is funny, Derek, not funny in one's mindset. Even after thinking I was interacting with Ivorybills, it never occurred to me that I would see one, because you've been so entrained that you're going to have, hundreds of hours of no contact, because that's what everybody had, including me up to that point. That I've seen the Ivorybill with certainty. I was not looking for it, in the sense that I was doing something else. So the first one, that February sighting, right? The bird was coming at me from 2 o'clock, and it was very low. And I say the bird, and this is in our video on our Facebook page, but something was lower than me, coming out of the bottomland and flying so straight that I thought it was mechanical. And there had been a study in these woods where there were still metal implements in the woods. And I thought that it was some kind of, because I'd scraped my shins on these things, I thought, oh no, I'm about to hit some wire or something. So I saw this thing come in, and I looked over and I saw the bird. And having gone to college in California and being very familiar with black-billed magpies, I thought that my brain did a scan, and while I'm very familiar with Ivorybill specimens, I'd never seen one flying. So I said literally this, and again, I grew up with horses, so I said in a loud voice, "Whoa, big bird, magpie." And then I started laughing maniacally. About the time I had uttered magpie, the bird had zoomed up and was out of my sight. My guess is that it did a reverse C, right? And it probably came back, it flew away from the same spot. What really struck me is that, again, it wasn't like a bird watching sighting. It was more like a limbic sighting. I perceived it as dangerous because it was flying so straight. And it's important to note that it was flying low, because that is my working hypothesis about the limiting factor about Ivory-billed woodpeckers is because of their relatively high rate of speed through which they fly through the woods, that they need to bleed off the kinetic energy when they land. So they have to fly low so that they can zoom up and go from, and I'm going to make these numbers up.
Interesting.
We don't know exactly, but I think the numbers, pileatids are reported to be maybe in 23 miles an hour, plus or minus 6 miles an hour. And Ivorybill is thought to be much faster than that. And anecdotally, reports I've heard about Ivorybills, frequently people say they've seen them flying low. So that was another unusual thing. Well, I've seen ducks flying through these woods, not very frequently, but they're always very high. So that was another thing that was unusual about it. So that was the February 18 sighting.
What was going through your mind after that? Like, how did you feel?
Exhilarated, but much like they say that the Carib Indians that saw Columbus's ship for the first time didn't really appreciate, they couldn't understand what it was. Honestly, almost the whole time I was viewing the bird, it wasn't until I got out magpie and sort of jolted myself into an analytical magpie. It couldn't be a magpie. So that's when my brain kind of came back online. In other words, I was so weirded out by how straight the thing was flying. On March 10, 2019, I was deploying automated recording units, ARUs, which are fantastic, but they're very sensitive to moisture, and it was threatening rain. So because I had a little time to kill, I didn't want to risk getting them wet. I did a mapping venture because even though this is, Louisiana, it's not like it's New Guinea. The maps aren't that great particularly with the water relief. So the map showed that you couldn't go directly south for more than maybe 250 meters. But from looking at that, it looked like you could go a long way. So anyway, so I just set out because I had some time to kill. And so on that day, I walked, I made it almost a mile and a quarter. And I was on the south end of a holly thicket. And I heard two Ivorybills calling, two the same call we had heard before. So I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be it. So I decided it was a tough call because.
Did you have a camera with you?
I didn't. And so this is very, you ready for this?
Yeah.
This was another advice from my friend in Arkansas. And I wish I'd talked to him before, is he said, if he were organizing an Ivorybill search, he would have everybody deposit their binoculars in a bin and just have cameras. Right. So I think that's very
Ryan
wise
and I
advice.
talk about this all the time. Because we never use binoculars. People are like, how do you not use binoculars? We like to document everything.
Exactly. And particularly with an Ivorybill, so I've seen them twice, and in the aggregate, not more than 13 seconds. But
if you had a camera, do you think you would have been able to get anything though?
Oh, this hurts me. Now that's great. Now I won't sleep tonight. Thanks, dear.
Well, I'm just saying, what was it so quick where it would you wouldn't even be able to?
No, the first one, there's no way I would have gotten it. The second one, this is what eats at my liver. Is that I heard them. And so whereas the first one was a limbic sighting, right? It was just my whatever it responded. And then I'm sure it was an Ivorybill, but I can't even say I really saw, I did see the whole bird that wasn't like a
magpie Ivory-billed.
Right, exactly.
Thing.
For my brain. If I had been speaking, it would have just been in grunts. But back to the story. So this March thing, where I heard them, I was very excited, but I had all this equipment. We were deploying ARUs, so I didn't have binoculars with me. I didn't have a camera, but I heard them well enough so that I knew positionally where they were. So when I walked my 250-pound carcass through the holly thicket, which of course, I was trying to be as stealthy as possible, but I was not very stealthy, I'm sure. So as I cleared the holly thicket, I saw the birds in flight to the east and could see all the field marks of the bird in front. So all I can tell you is the bird in front was a putative female because March 10, it didn't have any red in its crest. And it was adult sized.
And you got a real good look at it where you were
a great look at that.
Bam, that's it.
Bam. So that one is on my life list when you said.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
The first one wouldn't, but to answer your question, could I have gotten a photo? The answer is disgustingly yes.
No,
because I heard it, and I don't hear many reports of sightings where people say they heard them first. But this one, I was expecting to see the source of the sound, and it's either a flying fawn, and I'm just kidding. For those of you who before that, Kelby Uchley had said that kind of sounds similar, but different. Anyway, the point of the story is, I thought I was going to see Ivory-billed woodpeckers, and sure enough, when I cleared the holly thicket, there were two as big as Dallas, as we say in North Louisiana.
So I got a proposal for you, though. I think if you're in that situation again, instead of having your finger on the trigger for photos, start a video.
Well, you ready for this?
Yeah.
Good minds think alike, Derek. I have, I'll say the Wallace cam. So I have a GoPro mounted on the cap of my bill the bill of my cap, and it's going to be running all the time.
That's
and
a good call.
It's my mechanical genius friend, Jay Wallace, has put it together for me, who's unfortunately COVID quarantined. So as soon as Jay is out, I'll be trying that. And that's exactly what you need to be able to do, is to have something running constantly and not have that. Now, if we found the cavity, a cell phone would be good enough.
Well, that's your plan, right? Is to try,
right.
because we've talked before, and your goal is to find a nesting cavity, because that's really the
right.
only way you'd get some nice evidence,
right.
likely.
Exactly. And it wouldn't have to be a nest. It could be a roost, but an active cavity. I think even a photograph today, I think that would be treated with, first they would say it was a hoax. Then they would say, oh, well, that doesn't matter because it's the only Ivorybill. And when we didn't get another photo, they're dead. Because that's essentially what happened with Arkansas and Cornell is once that bird was no longer seen, it was presumed dead. And that was the last of Ivorybills, which is just a preposterous scientific statement. So the analogy that hit me like a ton of bricks in the shower the other day was, it was as if there's a burning barn. I know that there are horses in there, and I can't get enough people to come look to see that there might be horses in there that we need to let out. And I think that's a pretty good analogy, because there is a movement afoot to have the Ivorybill declared extinct by the federal government, which it's legally, this has always surprises people, legally it's critically endangered. It's not been declared extinct. And the importance of that, as I understand it, and I don't want to overstate the case because I haven't researched all the law, it would be the management of the forest would be different. And this is important because we need standing snags, standing dead trees. The more of those that exist, the better for all woodpeckers, including the Ivorybill. Our primary purpose, because of my the barn's on fire and the horses are in there analogy, we need to document the persistence of the Ivorybill as soon as possible. Now, within that, we go to schools and we give talks, and we want kids to think about it. And this is an important thing that I've been involved with the Ivorybill for over 40 years, and I have prejudices. In my presentation, I have the quote that's attributed to Mark Twain that said that it ain't what you don't know, it's what you think you know that's not true. And the Ivorybill, that is such that should be the lead statement, because all of the research that's been done on the Ivorybill, it's been hit and miss, and in the sense that, so Tanner, all his research was essentially done on one population in one parish in Louisiana. And so can you say that, can you generalize his very specific results to Ivorybills as a whole? And even Dr. Tanner writes in his great work that no, your results might vary. So our goal is to collect data, and from data we can then find patterns, and from patterns we can understand the Ivorybill better. But you're not going to you need to get the public involved, and they absolutely can participate. In the fall, hopefully the restrictions will be lifted somewhat, and we'll have brick and mortar places to come, and we'll have seminars, and we'll train people. And birders really need to be disabused that this is birding, of the concept that this is birding. This is out and out hunting. And because, in fact, I have a demonstration here. Because, so much of my life is with the Ivory-billed woodpecker. This is from the Congaree in South Carolina. They had it in the gift shop. It's great. It's plushy, and it's great with kids. But the point of the story is, this is all soft and cuddly, and we tend to anthropomorphize that. Well, surely the Ivorybill knows that Matt is looking out for it and wants to say no. The Ivorybill is, those that have survived because of their wiliness and their ability to escape human detection. So if an Ivorybill would kill you if he could. So that's what I mean, that it's really a hunting experience. And this has been great fun for me, because again, I didn't really grow up in the culture, but I've gotten very good at camouflage and at walking. You don't want to walk like a human predator going through the woods. And there are tips I can give on that. So, and answer your question, yes, we will actively seek people to come help us search. And as I've said, a successful search, we can't control the outcome. We can only control our effort.
It's kind of like a CBC kind of thing, or like a breeding bird atlas kind of thing. You have your search area and you can go look. You don't know what you'll find.
Exactly. And so the way I'm sure some people would counsel me not to be so open, but we're totally an open book. And my greatest, I've been lucky to see the bird twice. I mean, it's not complete luck in the sense that I've been persistent. I've been out there more than anybody else, and I have developed some techniques, but essentially you up your odds of putting yourself in a position to be lucky. But I have no proprietary interest in this, right? I'd be thrilled if anybody got the evidence. And I want, that's one of our goals, is to increase, raise all boats, improve ways of searching and documenting. And so as part of that, I'm happy to share all of our search methods. You'll note there's a $12,000 reward, and that's been great. So we offer a $12,000 reward for anybody who can lead us to a cavity. And it might sound cheesy to some people.
It's like the Wild West.
Yeah, but it's a real conversation starter.
Well, I think we covered a pretty good summary. So thanks so much for talking with us, and we really appreciate it. I'm excited to get out there and look.
Thanks, Derek. I so much appreciate you, and I'm very excited to get out in the field with you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Bye, Derek.